Yo guys, Rango back here with the next Riftbound card review. Today we're gonna look at the body cards, orange. So let's jump right into it. The Seals of Strength, I already talked about this for the most part in the Fury video, so if you're interested in like the full explanation, check out that one. But the short of it is that while this is kind of bad in terms of card advantage, we do know that adding like a power is a good effect, because Kaiser is the best deck for now, and that's exactly what the Kaiser Legend does. So I would be surprised if at some point down the line we actually never get a deck that plays one of these. Which color it will be really depends like on what kind of decks each color will receive in the future, how many recycle costs they have, and so on and so forth. But I do expect this to be more on the side of slower decks, to be able like that inherently generate a lot of card advantage. It's not that big of an issue for them to use one card for this, and they get to keep like their energy total up to play bigger threats earlier on by not having to recycle as much. So next up, the signature spells we're gonna skip for now. Those are gonna come in the review of each legend once we've been all through all the normal cards. Then next up, the 1 energy spell Flurry of Blades. Reaction, deal 1 to all units at battlefields. Oh, not even at a specific battlefield, but just to all battlefields. This seems like a pretty solid card. AoE is not that common right now, and you can, like in combat, you can flexibly assign what you, like the damage of your units, so dealing 1 to everything softens up everything a little bit, can be quite a lot of damage, and doesn't even have like a power cost. So seems like a decent card that a lot of like slower body decks will play for the foreseeable future. Sabotage. 1 energy, 1 power. Choose an opponent, they reveal their hand. Choose a non-unit card from it and recycle that card. Ooh. This is a crazy card. So it kind of depends on the context. We will be like what type of metagame we get in the future, and this is the kind of effect that probably gets better the more the game like ages, the more refined the decks get and things like that. But obviously it does cost 1 power. That's not to underestimate, but getting the information what your opponent has and then just hand ripping them 1, that's pretty crazy. I'm not too knowledgeable about how strong this is in resource-based card games. Like in Hearthstone, effects like these aren't particularly common. Like they are randomly based, you don't get the information, you don't get to choose, which obviously makes them a lot worse. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! These effects are ridiculous. And I imagine that at this point in most Magic formats they kind of are as well. Obviously this is a lot better when playing 1v1. In free-for-alls, like, it becomes quite a lot worse, but I'd be surprised if this card doesn't see play. To me this seems crazy, especially considering the cost. Like for the effect I don't think it's for the effect I think it's quite cheap actually. Obviously, it's a slight downside that you don't that you have to choose a non-unit card, so there's the potential to miss on this one. Although I feel like most decks we know about right now are easily spell dense enough to make that a quite unlikely scenario. And obviously, looking later down the line, this is really powerful against combo decks that like want to assemble a certain set of cards, and being able to just pack one of them and at the bottom of the deck can be quite devastating and delay their combo quite a bit. Another signature spell, skip that one. Then another 1 energy, 1 power spell, Unyielding Spirit. Reaction, prevent all spell and ability damage this turn. Ooh, this also sounds really strong, isn't it? You can play it as a reaction, like if you move to a battlefield, your opponent tries to remove your threat, you just play this, protect it, and you're good. If like your opponent plays a big AoE at the beginning of combat, just stop it. I think this sounds really crazy. Obviously, it gets worse, like the more you try to use spells and abilities yourself, right? Particularly abilities, because you can't quite control when they resolve. Like for spells, you can play your own first and then later on, sometimes at least, use this, depending on how like the interactions work out and how well your opponent plays around it. But this seems like a pretty powerful card. Not in every matchup though. Maybe this is more of a side deck kind of card, and not something like you just blindly put into your deck. This is somewhat matchup specific, of course. Next up, 2 energy, 1 power, Cannon Barrage. Another reaction, deal 2 to all enemy units in combat. Oh. A lot of AoE in this color, right? Also seems pretty solid, actually. Like, AoEs are not that common. This only affects in combat, so you have to fight for this to make sense, but again, similarly to Flurry of Blades, pretty strong card. Obviously, the power cost makes it a lot more difficult, and that it only basically hits at one battlefield at a specific timing with all units, all enemy units in combat, but this sounds like a pretty solid card. Something to note is, like, I'm obviously not quite aware of like which breakpoints are really important in this game right now. This is something like you just figure out from experience, from how the meta shapes up, but generally I'm valuing any kind of AoE relatively high right now, because at least Fury did not have too many good ones of that. So this, at least in the beginning, seems like a pretty good defensive AoE option. Obviously, that's to say that AoE is even good in this game. Like, depending, like the way the battlefield mechanic works, and that far from every unit from your opponent, like, it might only be a small chunk of the units your enemy has that they send into combat, especially knowing about cards like these, right? This might make the AoE cards a lot worse, obviously. Like, even for Flurry of Blades, like, they might not even commit too many of their units to battlefields, right? So We'll have to see that, but definitely like just a solid AoE spell from my first impression. 2 energy, 1 power, challenge. Action, choose a friendly unit and an enemy unit, they deal damage equal to their mights to each other. This also seems like just a pretty solid removal spell. Nothing more to say that. Obviously it's a little bit dependent on having like a relatively strong unit yourself. Because it's obviously a lot better if your own unit gets to live, right? But either way, seems fine. Again, the fact that it costs 1 power does not feel particularly good. I don't know. Spending power on defensive kind of cards to me right now sounds kind of awkward, but the quality of removal spells that like do not cost power is probably not that high at this point, so maybe right now that's something you have to settle for. Next up, 2 energy, 1 Might Citria of Cloudfield. When you play another unit buff me, I don't have a buff, get a +1 buff. Okay, does this work? Like, does buff work every time that you play a unit? Like, if I play 2 units, does this go up to 3 might? Honestly, it also sounds like a pretty decent card. Like, obviously, if you play it alone, it's understated, but just with another unit, it's already kind of even. At 3, it starts to become kind of good. And might just be interesting for either like aggressive decks that try to flood as many cards as possible onto the board, but also just for buff synergy decks. This is also very interesting, right? Two energy, spell Confront. Action. Units you play this turn enter ready, draw 1. This also just sounds good, right? With 2 energy, it's not that high. You can reasonably play like 1 or 2 other units with this, even relatively early on, and it even replaces itself. Like, honestly, 2 energy just to draw 1 and cycle through your deck might not be that terrible. Like thinning your deck a little bit. We have to see how long games go, how important that is in this deck, but if this is kind of stuck in your hand, you can definitely reasonably like have two energy left in some turn and just cycle this. Definitely not unimaginable, and you really only need 1 unit with this to enter ready to be fine, I think. So, pretty good card. Mobilize. 2 energy, channel 1 rune, exhausted if you can't draw 1. So this is basically Wild Growth from Hearthstone, which is obviously an incredible card. Like, everyone playing Hearthstone knows this. It's been nerfed to 3 mana for a reason. That said, in this game, even if it's the exact same card, it is a little bit worse. Why? Because you get 2 runes every turn, so it's kind of only half a Wild Growth if you think about it that way. Still, I expect this to be a pretty good card, and obviously one of the key cards in every single ramp strategy. With the Master Yi Aurora build, like, ramp is really strong in that variant, so yeah. Whenever there's like a pretty good, relatively high energy payoff that's worth ramping into, this will see play there. But keep in mind, this is not as good as Wild Growth in Hearthstone. It's not that good. 2 energy, 2 might, Pit Rookie. When you play me, buff another friendly unit. If it doesn't have a buff, it gets a +1 buff. Yeah, another solid unit, like, for obvious reasons in buff strategies, but also not that bad in other aggressive decks, I imagine. So, solid card. might, like, we definitely see it in buff strategies, but might even make its way into some aggressive, into some other aggressive strategies for the time being. Well up. 2 energy action. As you play this, you may spend a buff as an additional cost. If you do, ignore this spell's cost. Ready a unit. Alright, yeah. For 2 energy, ready a unit, I feel like is a little bit too... like, it's a little bit under... like, is a little bit overcosted. For 1, it would probably be quite insane. For 2, it's a little bit too expensive to see played just as that. But in buff decks that can kind of cheese it out, this looks like a solid card. 3 energy gear arena bar. Tap this, buff an exhausted friendly unit. If it doesn't have a buff, it gets a +1 buff. This does seem kind of awkward. Similar to the gears we've seen before, this also is kind of slow, but this time, like, it costs 3 energy. Like, you probably won't be able to use this actually on your first turn. Like, going second, you could theoretically play it, but you're not going to have an exhausted friendly unit. The sad part about this is that it has to buff an exhausted unit, so basically the turn you play it, even if you already can buff a unit, it's not going to have a lot of impact. It may bolster your defense at a battlefield a little bit, but this does not strike me as a particularly good card. I could see it, like, if we see like a slower buff deck that basically uses this as like a constant stream of buffs down the line for across a longer game, then this could at some point make sense, but outside of that I'm not really convinced by it, especially because the buff strategy inherently seems to kind of be on the more aggressive, at maximum mid-range side, just because, well, it gives you a lot of extra stats right up front, which is pretty good, and it's like for which is pretty good for bolstering offense. And the only buff effects we've seen is basically like you can use this buff to kind of cheat tempo a little bit, which is also like a more aggressive part, right? Then next, 3 energy, 3 might, crack shoot Corsair. When I attack, deal 1 to an enemy unit here. Just seems like a solid 3-drop, right? Not particularly impressive, maybe just good enough to see play like right now in the beginning, here and there. Maybe if there is some synergy with the damage, could also be pretty good in a deck like that. But this is the kind of card that in the beginning you might see like some of it for lack of better options, but is gonna be power crept rather quickly, I think. Especially because, yes, the extra run damage, so it's basically a 3 energy with 4 attack and 3 health. The 1 damage is probably not gonna deny like another unit the swing most of the time. That's gonna be relatively rare, so not too insane of a benefit, but it's like a 3-drop at a decent rate with some upside, so it can't be that bad, right? Even though we have not yet seen like many full vanillas, like not like a 3 energy, 3 might, and that's it, right? Most of them have like at least 1 keyword or something like that, and I'm not sure that this will be the best option here, but we'll obviously have to see what other cards this color offers, right? Then 3 energy, 3 might. First mate, when you play me, ready another unit. This, kind of depending on the deck, is probably already better than the Crackshot Corsair. Just being able to ready another unit, cheat tempo a little bit there if you've just played it, or if I don't know, your opponent exhausted it for whatever reason, whatever. I think this is probably better than in most situations than the Crackshot Corsair, even though Crackshot Corsair obviously is better alone. But again, just like a solid card, although I can in like future decks see like some pretty strong synergy with this card also more than with the Corsair. There definitely might at some point be like a certain minion that you really value getting in there quickly, and this could be pretty good in that situation. Then Kraken Hunter, 3 energy, 2 power, 5 might. Also accelerate and assault, so 6 when it's attacking. As you play me, you may spend any number of buffs as an additional cost. Reduce my cost by... Okay. So instead of recycling runes for it, we can spend buffs, which makes this quite a bit better. Like at first I thought, well, it's kind of overstated, but the power cost is insane. One question I have here is if we could also pay the accelerate cost with the buff. I'm not entirely sure on this. I think it's not the case, but if it is, this is really good. Like, even if it's not, this is a pretty good payoff for like these aggressive tempo-based buff decks. And we'll probably see play there. Granted that you can consistently like gain enough buffs to pay for this early on enough. That's kind of the condition here, but this card in itself, assuming that you can cheat the power cost relatively consistently, this looks like a pretty threatening minion. Next, Mistfall gear. When you buff a friendly unit, you may pay an orange power and exhaust this to ready it. Okay. This can permanently do it. This honestly might be pretty good, particularly in slower decks, to like start kind of a comeback, right? You play this as at an earlier turn with some energy you have left, and then later down the line, if you have like some big drop played out, you can use this to have it have immediate impact, which seems pretty strong. Obviously kind of depends how easy it is to pay for this, but I would imagine that in some ramp decks or things like that, this is a pretty solid card to kind of claw your way back into the game with having like immediate impact on the big drops you're playing. Next, 3 energy, 3 might, Packer Cup, hidden, yeah, and that's it. All right, again, the French vanilla kind of thing. It's okay. Probably something you mostly consider in like hidden decks that are centered around hidden. And aside from that, in the beginning, again, it might just be the best 3 drop, randomly be the best 3 drop for a certain deck that a certain deck has, even if it doesn't really synergize with hidden, but is probably something So might see play for the time being, even outside of hidden strategies, but for that purpose will probably be power crept rather quickly. Another 3 energy gear, Pirate's Haven. When you ready a friendly unit, give it +1 this turn. Ooh, this is interesting, especially because it can hit multiple units. This might be a pretty decent payoff for decks that go wide. The one issue I see with this is that, well, you ready your units at the beginning and play this afterwards. So again, it needs a turn to really have impact, and if you're a deck that's going wide, do you really want to spend 3 energy on this? I'm not sure. We've seen some like synergy with making units ready immediately. Also not sure how it works with accelerate cards, but they say they enter ready, so I would assume this does not give them the buff. They are already ready, they aren't like readied. So not quite convinced by this card. Like, it is a payoff to decks going wide, but it doesn't seem like a particularly good payoff, especially because again it's a little bit slow, and these decks really, for them, usually they really need to convert the advantage they have while they have it and really snowball it at home, and cards that are kind of slow are oftentimes pretty awkward in these kinds of strategies. Next, for energy, Catalyst of Eons. Channel 2 runes exhausted. If you couldn't channel 2 runes this way, draw 1. So this is a little bit weird, because if you only channel 1 rune, you still get to draw 1, but if you channel none, you only get to draw 1. So that's a little bit weird, but it's kind of an edge case, right? Usually you're gonna just play this for 4, channel 2 runes, ramp into your big guys, and as a ramp card it is pretty good. And similarly to Mobilize, will just index that have like a threat that's worth ramping into with this kind of card. It will see play. For energy, 3 Might, Herald of Scales. Your dragon's energy costs are reduced by 2 to a minimum of 1. This has a lot of potential. This is quite a bit of like energy cheating. Something to note compared to other card games, the fact that we have power makes energy cheating also inherently a little bit less valuable. Also, it has the safety valve of not making them cheaper than 1. But either way, this seems like a pretty good card. The question is just if we already have like enough dragons we can play with this. You obviously also kind of want to have enough dragons in hand, have the card advantage to cheat out multiple ones with this. Ideally the turn you play it, at the latest the turn after, but mana cheating effects are rarely bad, and there isn't really a big indicator on this why it would be bad. Also, I do have the impression that keeping a unit in your base and not committing them to a battlefield makes them relatively hard to remove. Like, maybe it's kind of color dependent, but it's definitely a lot harder than removing a unit at a battlefield. So keeping this in your base might be able to generate a lot of tempo. Seems like a solid card. Once we get enough dragons, whether or not that will be the case immediately, we'll have to see. Next up, for energy 1 power for Might, Kinku Monk. When you play me, buff 2 other friendly units. Yeah, this is a buff card. something to note that is that basically this has 2 might charge, like that can, or basically already accelerated, that can swing immediately. That's pretty strong. One issue for this is that, again, you already have to have 2 other friendly units, so this is kind of a payoff again for decks that are going wide a little bit, and also obviously good in buff decks if they can consistently keep these 2 units on board, but 2 is not that much. You probably can do that for the most part, and if this hits 2, it seems like a solid card. Primal Strength, 4 energy, 1 power, action, give unit +7 this turn. Ooh. 7 might. This seems fine. Something to note is that, well, yes, this is only 6, this is 7. These 6 stats are permanent. This one is not. Still, when you're in combat, your opponent may be like cheated out a big threat or something like this. This is a pretty good answer to that. It is kind of expensive, I feel like, for the cost, but just the +7, like, don't forget, not only does this usually in combat out a card, like a unit from your opponent, potentially even multiple, you can assign the damage to multiple units, but it might also just protect your own unit, and in these kinds of situations it seems pretty good. The question is just how often you get in these situations, like, are they common enough to warrant playing this card? Because if you only use it for one of the purposes, usually you will for both, because if after using this your opponent does not have enough might to kill your unit, it will, like, they also won't have enough to survive whatever the unit has, for the most part, except for like some keywords, shield or whatever. But just for removing threats and not protecting your own unit, I feel like it's not good enough oftentimes, if that's the situation. So I think this is definitely a card you can consider for your deck, but it's not particularly crazy. Next up, Kiana, champion unit. 4 energy, 1 power, 4 might. Deflect, opponents must pay a power to choose them with a spell or ability. Obviously already pretty good. And then when I conquer, draw 1 or channel 1 rune exhausted. I think this is a really good champion. With Deflect, it's a little bit slippery. It's not that easily answered. It has fine stats for the cost, and just drawing one, just if you draw a channel one rune of this already is quite insane. And I could definitely see, like, especially with like cards Primal Strength, things like that, buffing this. I can definitely see that this might be kind of a linchpin for some slower strategies that they play around in the early game, or that you just play Kiana, protect the queen, with a lot of cards to buff her or to protect her, and use that to make her conquer, to gain points, and then keep your card advantage high through Kiana's own effect. Definitely seems like a strategy with a lot of potential, and we've seen already quite a few cards to support this, and if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the Master Yi variants that are pretty dominant in the format right now. 4 energy, 1 power, Spoils of War, reaction. If an enemy unit has died this turn, this costs 2 less, draw 2. Okay. If you play this for its normal cost, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. If you play it for the reduced cost, it's fine. Even then, I don't think this is crazy, but it's probably fine. So slower decks that like remove a unit with a spell and then play this afterwards to draw 2 might like this. Also, we don't have like too many, we haven't seen too many very reliable draw cards yet, so that's also a bonus point for this. Like, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot that offers this effect. But it's very dependent on like fulfilling its condition to cost less. So really only an option for decks that can do that, but a solid card in decks that in those decks. 4 energy, 3 might, Wildclaw Shaman. When you play me, you may spend a buff to buff me and ready me. Okay, so basically, you know, you're not spending the buff, you're just transferring it to this and making it ready. And a 4 energy, 4 might that enters ready is just really good. This might be one of the payoff cards for buff strategies, I think. So if a buff strategy is a thing, and it doesn't have to be like super centered on buffs, it might just be like that you do play a couple of good value buff cards, and that's enough to have like consistently 1 buff to play this out, right? And then this is a pretty great card, I think. Then 5 energy, 2 power, 6 might, Carnivorous Snapvine. When you play me, choose an enemy unit at a battlefield. We deal damage equal to our mites to each other. So obviously this with 2 power is relatively expensive, but it's also a very, very powerful minion. It comes in 6 might, is already quite a lot, and basically takes out a unit. Don't forget, like, you can just choose a unit that's weaker than this, kill it, and then for combat this will still have the damage, if I'm correct, but even then, doing that before combat, before your opponent can decide how to assign the damage, things like that, it's pretty powerful. And like, it's also kind of versatile in that regard. Like, you can just play this as a minion if your opponent doesn't have anything else, that's fine, but also is removal. The only downside obviously is if your opponent only has minions bigger than this, but I don't think that is particularly likely, so this just seems like a pretty good card, particularly like in ramp decks that also might not be affected by the power cost as much because they just add a lot of extra runes. This might be like a pretty good just minion and removal option. So like I said, claw your way back into the game after sandbagging a little bit in the early turns, right? Garen signature spell, skip that. 5 energy, 5 might. I haven't looked too much at how much dragon synergy we have yet, but dragons definitely are interesting with that cost reduction thing. Dragons are always interesting. Dune Drake, when I attack, give me +2 if there's a ready enemy unit here. Okay, again, like kind of a French vanilla with a little bit of upside. How oftentimes will there be a ready enemy unit at a battlefield? They obviously have to have been holding that battlefield already for a little bit longer, which means that this is, for the most part, this is good in like situations where you aren't that like in like not too good of situations for yourself. Also, your opponent might be wary of this card, like it comes down and has to wait a turn, like they might just pull their ready units back, depending on how exactly the board state is, so your opponent can play around it a little bit. And in the end, it's just a stat stick. Like, again, as for all these French vanilla cards, in the beginning, they might be fine because of a lack of other options, but usually those won't stay in decks particularly long. Especially because, like, if we compare it to a Carnivorous Snapvine, obviously this also has 2 power costs, but this is so much better than Dune Drake. Just by that comparison, Dune Drake already suffers a little bit. And another 5-drop with 1 power this time, 5 might, Misfortune, Accelerate, ganking. The first time I move each turn, you may ready something else that's exhausted. This just seems pretty strong. Continues the trend of champions usually being better than units, which I think is exactly what they were aiming for. This having immediate impact, ganking, we'll have to see how much ganking is worth, how good it actually is. Right now I'm imagining it to be pretty strong, because it makes it quite difficult for your opponent to to keep up with your movements. Also, you can just move from one battlefield to the other to get like an additional point that turn, instead of having to recall your units and then go again next turn. It seems like ganking might offer quite a few easy points in a way like that, which Accelerate might do as well. So this having both is quite threatening, and this readying something on move seems pretty good. The one downside, I think, is that if you move this and ready another unit, I don't think that unit can move with her to the same battlefield. Like, you'll have to do combat and then move the other unit afterward. That might be fine in a lot of situations, but definitely is worse than just playing Misfortune and moving it with something else to the battlefield, right? This makes Misfortune like a little bit more susceptible to losing in combat and things like that. But just seems like a pretty good champion. Here's our auto out for everyone interested. And then next up, Overt Operation. 5 energy to power action for each friendly unit. You may spend its buff to ready it. Then buff all friendly units. Okay, so this is a big payoff for the buff decks, for decks going wide. And the effect is obviously powerful. Depending on how many buffs you have, readying like a few units pretty strong, and buffing all friendly units also. The thing is, it costs quite a lot, so this will be reliant on how many units and buffs this buff strategy can keep active. I'm not quite sure where the breakpoint is, but I do feel like you do need quite a lot to actually make this feel good, and we'll have to see if you can consistently enough get there. Right now, from the cost, I'm not convinced that there's a buff strategy that has like enough gas to support this. Then set 5 energy, 1 power, 4 might when I play it, and when I conquer, buff me. If I don't have a buff, get +1. Spend my buff, give me +4 this turn. Alright. So this also seems like a pretty strong buff card. Just it basically is a 5 energy, 1 power, 5 might. And you can immediately use him for 8, so he's a pretty big beat stick right out the gate, and like, you can reasonably expect him to just provide you buffs for like the costs of the cards, to cheat them out, to gain the additional resources by spending buffs, whatever. Seems like a solid card, and even outside of buff strategies, just 5 energy, 1 power, and have him basically be an 8 might unit then. And if he conquers, he gets the buff again, so then he can be at 8 again. The way this works, I think you can only make him 8 during your turn. But still seems like just like a pretty powerful beater. Here's Alt Art. And next up, 6 energy, 6 might, Bilgewater, Bully. While I'm buffed, I have ganking. I can move from battlefield to battlefield. Okay. This really depends on how strong ganking is, but I feel like at 6, I don't want just this French vanilla that is even dependent on other cards to get its effect. I think this seems kind of underwhelming. Yeah. Garen, 6 energy, 1 power, 5 might, assault 2, shield 2. So basically, while he's on a battlefield, he's at 7. Definitely not a particularly exciting card, that's for sure. And if I compare him just to Set, he also seems a little bit underwhelming. Gonna be real. Like, yes, defending he's a little bit stronger, but Set will usually be like even 1 ahead when attacking, like 1 might stronger when attacking, 2 might weaker when shielding, but Set is just 1 energy less, so Garen seems a little bit underwhelming there, but he's not that far off Set, so still kind of solid, right? But just not a particularly interesting card. Then 6 energy, 1 power, Gentleman's Duel. Action, give a friendly unit +3 this turn, then choose an enemy unit, they deal damage equal to their mights to each other. Okay, so this similar to Where Is It challenge, just that it costs 4 more to give your unit +3. I don't think this makes the cut. Like, this as removal just seems more clunky, and I don't think spending 4 energy for like a +3 buff just on this turn is particularly great. And I'm not quite sure, like, or like, I'm pretty sure like decks that like this would rather run challenge, and then the question kind of becomes, well, do you want challenge and this? And I'm not sure that we have like the need for this many of these cards. And again, like, at 6 energy, 1 power, this is quite a hefty cost for like a pretty conditional removal. Then Lee Sin, 6 energy, 6 might, accelerate, other buff friendly units at my battlefield have +2. Another buff payoff card in buff stacks. This might be good enough. Granted that we get enough of these. But if you already have like 2 or 3 buffed units on your field, you put this down with accelerate, that could be quite the swing. Also just 6 might, 6 for 6 energy with accelerate already is not that bad. So in buff decks this probably has a home, but not particularly good outside of that. And Godfist Lee Sin as his alt art. Pretty cool. Then Udyr. 6 energy, 1 power, 6 might. Spend my buff, choose one you've not chosen this turn. Okay, so if we have enough buffs, we can use it multiple times a turn. Deal 2 to a unit at a battlefield, stun a unit at a battlefield, ready me, give me ganking this turn. Okay. This sounds really good. Just provided that we get enough buffs for this, giving him all these effects, and like he has a lot of flexibility. Using multiple of these effects kind of synergizes in a way, like 2 to a unit make them easier to battle, ready him, maybe the turn you play him, move immediately, get that battlefield. The stun can obviously help with ganking. If he already is at a battlefield, you could also ready if you played him last turn, you can, and he is ready, you can move him at a battlefield, take that, ready him, gank the other battlefield. This just seems like a really versatile card, and personally superior to Lee Sin in like buff-centered strategies, and this might also be good enough in like decks that just play a couple of good buff units that are not too focused on buffs, because just the versatility with all these effects seems pretty great, not gonna lie. Then Warwick, let's look at this artwork. This looks a lot better. 6 energy, 1 power, 5 might. I enter ready. When I attack, kill all damaged units here. Ooh. Okay, there's obviously a really big fantasy, because you can basically assign his might, like just 1 damage to every unit is damaged and they die. Oh no, being when I attack resolves beforehand. So you would need like a card like Flurry of Blades to resolve beforehand, and then have him come down afterwards. But just the fact that he enters ready already isn't that bad. When I attack, kill damage enemies units here could be treated kind of as a bonus, and if we have enough cards to synergize with this sounds pretty good. Like in a deck with a lot of removal, with like maybe some small AoEs, this honestly seems pretty decent. Although it's not like super reliable, kind of like conditional with being reliant on other cards. So definitely an interesting card. I see the fantasy, and if that happens, it's obviously phenomenal. I'm not quite sure how often that happens, but even if it doesn't happen too often, just because of the fact that he enters ready, it might be good enough. Like even just by that, he's already basically just a 5 energy, 5 might with accelerate that you always have to pay, and that already isn't that bad, right? That's already fine, probably. Next up, 7 energy, 2 power, 8 might, Inivia Primal. When I attack, deal 3 to all enemy units here. This seems also relatively strong. Like it's a big threat packed into an AoE. It also like just might kill some of the smaller units immediately before attacking, so not taking damage there. It's obviously quite costly, but this might be a pretty good card to ramp into, to maybe cheat out early and just demolish certain aggressive strategies. And with that, I'm pretty sure that this will have a place in many slower decks and many ramp decks, just by being a big threat, with also the added utility of being an AoE. Obviously, like this for obvious reasons, becomes very, very powerful if you can ready it immediately. Might be something to think about. If you have to wait a turn, that might kind of be the deal breaker for this, depending on the cards we see. Like in the future, I could imagine that you'd rather have like an AoE and an independent big threat, but for now, this just seems pretty good. Then we have Master Yi Hold, 7 energy, 1 power, 6 might. Ganking, I enter already. Seems like a solid card. The issue is that for 7 might, 1 power, 6 seems a little bit small. Yes, it does enter ready. Yes, it does have ganking. This is all nice, but and obviously with the ready can be helpful to like get back into things. We all already know that Master Yi as a legend is pretty strong, and this is the champion it uses as its command unit, kind of, so it's really strong there. And as that option, just having this always accessible as like a panic removal and things like that is pretty strong. But I'm not convinced that you will see this run naturally. Like, just put... I don't think you will put this into an orange deck that cannot... That's not a Master Yi deck. Just the one of in the Yi Legends, and that's probably enough. Next up, 7 energy, 6 might, Stormclaw, Earth Sign, tank. When you play me, channel 1 rune, exhausted. Yeah, fine card, solid card for these ramp decks. Obviously the ramp comes down rather late, which is kind of an issue. You're already relatively close to the cap when this comes down. And they're all like, if you're already at 7 energy, do you really need to ramp further? Wouldn't you like prefer even Yi, get some removal, or like a true, like something that's truly threatening, something that has like immediate impact onto the battlefield at that point? That's kind of the issue I see with this card. So I'm not quite convinced. Like, if games are really, really long and at 7 you still want to ramp further, this obviously becomes fine, but I don't think that will be the case, and that makes this card kind of meh. Next up, 8 energy, 2 power, 8 might, Dead Bloom Predator. Deflect, so they must pay a power to target this with a spell or ability. You may play me at an occupied enemy battlefield, and this unit seems crazy. From my experience with like the demo decks, this was really strong because it's like, it's a big threat that basically has ready. Like, yes, you can't move it to an empty or an allied battlefield, but this basically has ready, like this basically enters ready, just beats up an opposing unit, and especially if you're ramping into it, just this alone with 8 can pretty reliably probably conquer a battlefield on its own. And with Deflect, once it has that battlefield, it's pretty strong. The one downside compared to Ready, the actual big downside, is that again you can't move it with your own units together. But this definitely seems, for those ramp decks, like one of the big payoffs to just come in and swing the board into your favor after ramping for the first couple of turns. And then a gear, 9 energy, 2 power, Dazzling Aurora. At the end of your turn, reveal cards from the top of your main deck until you reveal a unit. Play it, ignoring its cost, and recycle the rest. This has a lot of potential. Like, you know, this is obviously the one gear that is going to be targeted by gear removal. We do have some of that, and this is what it's for the most part. I don't think any other gear is really that important to certain strategies that you need to consider removing this, but this in Yi, ramping into it, playing it, and just putting down a big unit at the end of every turn, plus whatever you're playing alongside it during your turn, seems really strong and will be really difficult to answer once you get to that state. This is probably the best late game card. Like, I still have to look at like the other colors, but I struggle to imagine something that has better late game than this Aurora deck, and this obviously makes the card great. And the better cards we get from this, the stronger this will be. Something to know, the only issue with this, like, again, it is kind of slow, right? Getting there might be difficult, especially in like very aggressive meta games. So when you're playing against like a Kaiser that's pretty aggressive, it can be difficult to get to this point. Especially, and because after you play it, you put the minion down, you can't protect yourself during the turn you play it. So we'll have to see if this actually comes down in time enough. But from what we've seen in China so far, it seems to come down early enough in many matchups at least. And once it does, you have pretty much won the game. Like, just getting one singular big threat of this is already not that bad. At the second, it becomes really crazy. And I'm not quite sure how this works, but the way this reads, I would assume that with Dazzling Aurora, you could even play cards like Deadbloom Predator immediately to the enemy battlefield, get combat there, and immediately claw your way back into it. The way this reads, I'm pretty sure this works, and this is then obviously one of the best hits of Dazzling Aurora. And like, yeah, this is just one of the cards that in certain metagames could become absolutely wild. It could become like really problematic. And we'll have to see how good aggressive strategies that are at yeah, finding winning games before this really has an impact. And then Mountain Drake, just a 9 energy, 10 might, big vanilla. Obviously slightly overstated with the 10 might, but not too impressive. The only reason I could see that you play this card is Dazzling Aurora. Like, in this kind of Dazzling Aurora big minion kind of deck, I can definitely see it. But outside of like cheating this out, it doesn't seem particularly impressive. And then we have the 12 energy Volibear, and it seems I've misremembered that with the 10 energy Volibear I said that you would usually go for the other one, and you don't. The bigger one is the worst one, the other one is better, it's cheaper, it has kind of more impact. When an opponent moves to a battlefield other than mine, draw 1. For 12 energy, 2 power, shield 3 and tank, 10 might. So this is obviously quite a big threat, but it's expensive, it costs a lot. The draw effect, while nice, is kind of supposed to make your opponent move into this big thing that's really good at defending. But at this cost total, I'd really rather have something there with more immediate impact. Like, why would I play this for 12 if I can play this for 8? For the most part. And then I did wrong to the other Polar Bear. That was actually the better one. That said, overall, I don't think that either of them is particularly impressive. Here is our dot. And with that, I think we're done. Yeah, now we only get to the legend, so that's the body cards. Overall, some decent AoE, like then challenge seems like a pretty solid removal. We have some ramp, which is always interesting, and then all that buff synergy, which we'll have to see if that strategy pans out. Right now, in the beginning, I don't think it will be too strong, but time will tell in the future. That said, we have actually some pretty good pair of cards for the ramp strategies, so I'm definitely looking forward for that, and I hope you are as well, if you're interested in Riftbound content and other TCGs. Like and subscribe. So we'll see us next time. Until then, have a great time and bye.